Hi, I'm Jessie.
Hey, I'm Ryan, and you're listening to Your Therapist Is Not Okay.
Last week's episode had an interesting theme. We took the idea of conflict and decided to actually problematize it. What happens when you have conflict with somebody, but they can't meet you right where you're at? Or you want to have healing and someone's not there? We talked about all the ways that that can actually hurt you and how it might come up in that relationship for you. And today, we're going to talk about how you can have that conversation and what are some strategies you can have that are going to make you feel safe in the kind of healing journey you're on and the kind of conflict you want to have.
Yeah, this is all about a lot of, protecting your peace and thinking through how to take care of yourself, even if you're not going to have the outcome that you want, which is something that we recognize is really important to talk about because we don't know what outcome you're going to have. You don't know what outcome you're going to have. That is one of the things that's so foundationally frightening about conflict for folks is the unpredictability of other people, the unpredictability of life. So let's think about the aspect that we do have control over, which is how we show up and how we take care of ourselves.
Protect your peace is my mantra right
Mm.
now. I love it. It allows me to stay grounded. It also allows me a certain level of accountability.
Mm.
What am I going to take on that I need to? And what am I choosing to take on that I don't? It actually gives me a really good firm foundation to allow my peace, which I've realized as the older I get is priceless. We're going to teach you about this today. And one of the biggest things that can come up in our offices is when you've noticed something that is really impacting you. Ryan and I often joke of like, our number one question is, have you talked to them about this?
Yeah. Because so often for ourselves or our clients, like, no,
No, I'm talking to
no.
you about this.
But then how
And
could they know?
and we often end with that. But here's actually the really sweet other part of that.
Mm.
You probably haven't talked to them because you don't know how it's going to be received. You probably haven't talked to them because you've tried before and it hasn't been met, or you've been shamed,
No.
or there's something that you've only just now recognized in therapy that you want to bring up or you want healing from, but the patterns are established. The person hasn't moved from that position. How do you move forward when someone's staying the same?
Absolutely. And that's just part of the reality of conflict. And it's going to happen. It's definitely going to happen. So it's important for us to talk about that other side when someone else is really defensive and when the vulnerability that you try to share ends up not being met and you or the other person or both of you are upset and scared. Especially because we tend to build these things up in our heads, right? Because of exactly what Jess and I were just talking about, because it can be so hard to initiate these conversations, because we may have had those conversations go poorly in the past. We build up a story and a narrative in our minds. We maybe rehearse the conversation a lot, try to think about how it's going to go, how we want to show up. And then at the end of it, we realize it's not gone the way that we wanted to. It has ended up feeling hurtful for us or the other person. Someone has stormed off. Someone has made a statement that they can't take back that, really cut deep. There can be a big loss in that, a big loss in thinking like I put energy, bravery, courage into broaching this conversation and it didn't go the way I wanted it to, especially if it's the kind of thing that's been building up tension in our bodies and in our minds. And we're just finally having the conversation because we need to get rid of that tension, because we need some of that release. And when we don't get that release because it doesn't go how we want, that's a lot to carry. It's a big disappointment.
There's a lot of loss in this. One of the things that you might be feeling is grief.
Mhm.
And this might feel like a disenfranchised grief
Mhm.
because it's a conversation you haven't had. So there's
Mhm.
no anger because there's nothing that's happened. And you might be feeling your body know that you can't go there So you can't have that
Mm.
reconciliation. You can't actually have that repair.
Yeah. Yeah, and I can think of many examples working with clients where they've said like, and well, I'm not going to have that conversation with this person because I know it's not going to go well. I've tried this kind of conversation with them before, and that's just not our relationship. I just know that's not going to happen. So whether you decide to try it or decide not to try it because of past experience, there is that grief, that kind of unnameable grief of that relationship being the kind of relationship where you can have that conversation, where you can feel met in that way.
That's the first step, I would say,
Mm,
is decide to grieve even before it
mm,
happens. You're allowed to do that. We're here as therapists to help you do that. Sometimes you have to actually allow yourself the feeling of grief that the relationship that you want may not be the relationship you're going to get. And there might be loss in that. There might be loss of the relationship. And
mhm.
sometimes it's not loss of the relationship. Sometimes it's loss of the type
Mm,
of depth in that relationship.
yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. There's something that I'll often talk with folks about in this kind of planning for the conflict stage or anticipating the conflict stage, talking about expectations. There's one very common kind of tainted expectation that we can come in. Well, there's more than one, but there's one on my mind in this moment. We can come in with this kind of tainted expectation that's about how the other person will feel. We want them to feel interested. We want them to feel remorseful about something they've done. We want them to feel excited. If our desire is about how someone else feels, that is automatically going to be kind of a tainted conversation because we don't know how they're going to end up feeling and we have no control over it whatsoever. It's okay to acknowledge that you would like to kind of be met in a particular way, that you would like someone to be understanding of that. But it's best to enter conflicts with something that's fully under your control. Like, I want to say how I feel about this.
Yeah.
It has to be about how you're going to show up, what you're going to do. And it might be, maybe you have a particular conflict dynamic that you don't want to do again. So maybe your goal for that conversation is, I don't want to lose my temper. Maybe they'll lose their temper. You have no control over that.
That is the second thing that we want you to pay attention to. We often talk about boundaries
Mhm.
in North America. You've heard it on this podcast. But here's a good way to think about your boundaries. They're allowed to feel however they want.
Yeah.
You have to let that go. You can't have them accept, understand, take responsibility. That's on you. That's your expectation. And actually let that go. When you're saying something to someone, they're allowed to be angry. They're allowed to be upset, sad, frustrated. They're even allowed to say things that don't make sense to you or not hear you. That sucks. I'm not going to pretend that doesn't suck, but they're allowed to. That's a
Hmm.
boundary, and that's theirs. Here's the thing that I need you to hear. You don't have to take that on. You don't have to take on that anger. If they pull it back on you and add shame, you don't have to take that on. You don't. You can watch them be upset, frustrated, try to defend their way out of it. And you can watch it happen. And it doesn't have to be something you have to do anything about. Whenever we give anything away, and I mean anything, love, generosity, care, critique, conflict, anything we give to another person, they have the responsibility and the insight and the impetus to do whatever they want with that. And that can be really scary, as Ryan was just saying, because we want them to understand us.
Hmm.
And if they don't, you don't have to take that on.
Absolutely. And when it comes to boundaries and how much they've been discussed, boundaries are, they go both ways, right? Like Jesse is saying, right? Other people don't have to do what we want them to do. And there is, I think, kind of a lot of misinformation about boundaries right now in pop psychology, pop media, unintentionally, right? And this always happens when it's like, on the one hand, beautiful thing that people are talking about boundaries. People are talking about mental health. People are talking about relationship communication. That's great. But sometimes it gets turned into a little bit of a shorthand, maybe a little bit misunderstood. A lot of people talk to me about boundaries they have, and they're actually just like a request or a hope. And we can, of course,
Yeah.
have our hopes for things, right? Like that, Jesse, you'll never raise your voice to me in anger. But that's
Yeah.
not a boundary. That is something that I would like. When it actually becomes a boundary is when it's something under my control. So if I were to say, Jesse, if you start shouting at me, I'm going to end this conversation. So
Yes.
the boundary is ending the conversation. It's the behavior that I have control. I'm choosing what to do. And Jessie may have her own boundaries too. It's like I get to say when I'm angry. And so she says when she's angry, but she doesn't control my reaction to that, right?
No.
And so it's actually an empowering way, I think, to think about boundaries because the only person that can violate your boundary is you. Your boundary is the action that you take. And that actually can put us as individuals in really hot water too, because now we have to decide, am I really going to end this call and potentially have more tension between me and Jesse when I really don't want that? That's really scary to me.
To be fair, I've never raised my voice to Ryan. I'm a relatively gentle soul.
No, no, is the most random example ever. No. We're not beefing, guys. We've told you before, we're not beefing.
But actually, and sometimes that might be your boundary. Sometimes I need to say something and it might have tears attached.
Mm,
That doesn't mean I'm upset. I don't need you to do anything about it. Sometimes when I get angry, I have an emotion.
mhm,
I've seen a lot of clients say this, and I'm like, oh, that's a wonderful boundary you can say to start the conversation. It might be really hard for me to have a really deep chat without my body reacting.
mhm,
Well, here's what I need from you. Listen and allow me to deal with my reaction without you having to be activated, turn away, not be able to deal with me. This is just how I am. I love that. It
mm,
shows how both people, and this goes back to how to have good conflict. Obviously, we're doing an opposite episode, but
mhm,
this shows how you can start this. That no matter what someone else does, it's not on us, it's on them to hold it up. One of the things I think that can come up really well with this is with guilt
mm,
or those who say passive aggressive comments. Ooh, I should give an example of this. If I say, Ryan, I'm really upset by something, and you're like, well, you're never there to actually hear me when I want to talk anyway. Or this is a
mm,
typical thing for you to say, I'm left holding the bag on something. Ryan could seamlessly put it back on me. And that's another way of us holding a boundary.
mm,
That could be a response that we're like, that's not on me to hold. And so here's what you need to do. When somebody does something that is either guilting, not holding up to a good boundary, anger, passive aggressive, just accept what they say.
mhm,
I hear you saying that. That's all you have to do. I hear that this is what you're saying to me. I acknowledge that when I said this, this is your response to that. Here's how I'm actually feeling. Those three things do a secret formula that can actually help in so many conversations. It allows the person to feel heard without you actually going into that. I'm saying typical thing for me to say, what do you mean by that? Is falling into the trap. Don't do
mhm,
that. Acknowledge it and understand that they're saying that without owning it. It might not be a typical thing for you to say. It actually might have been the hardest thing you could have possibly said. You don't have to do any of that. Just acknowledge it and then speak from your perspective. That trifecta allows the other person to feel heard. It takes away the wind out of their sails because you didn't fall trap to becoming a villain when you were trying to actually share something that was very vulnerable.
mhm,
And then it brings it back on point.
mhm. And it means that you get to fill in that blank of what you actually feel, right? Instead of letting someone else choose that for you. And that can be an antidote to feeling misunderstood by someone else. It's not quite the same, but it can help to understand yourself, right? To hear yourself say the thing that you're grounded in instead of getting lost in what the other person said about you. Just to acknowledge that, put it aside, like Jesse was saying, and then you get to say the truth of it for you. And I do think there can be a real power in hearing us say something that we've been thinking, hear something that we've been feeling come out of our mouths, just kind of like allows it to be cemented into reality. Be like, oh, no, I'm not jealous of you. I just missed you.
Yes.
I hear that you're worried about that. I just really miss spending quality time with you.
This is taking some of the elements of part two of the conflict episode. We're bringing it in, but we're
Hmm.
not necessarily getting to have the conclusion we want, but we're
Hmm.
still owning ourselves in the process.
Right. This is the kind of work that you might do if you were bringing relationship issues to individual therapy rather
Yeah.
than to couples therapy, right? We're going to talk a lot about like how can we manage the way that we show up in conflict so that we are being true to ourselves, so that we are caring for ourselves, and not falling into our side of whatever dynamics may be no longer healthy for us. But again, having no control over what the other party does, especially when the other party, like we were talking about last episode, is not interested in doing this kind of conflict negotiation, is not interested in going to therapy.
And those defenses will come up in this conversation.
Oh
And
yeah.
so here's a weird one. You've
Mm.
probably heard this before. It's probably pretty ripe on social media. Meeting someone where they're at.
Mm.
I actually don't mind it. I actually think it's a really helpful way of saying it. It's not shaming to the other person. It doesn't make you above them.
Mm-mm.
It just means that you're on different pages. Maybe two different books. To be fair, you're reading two different
Certainly. Could be that,
certainly,
yes.
right? And so you don't have to shame that. There's no shame in realizing that someone else might need their story to be a particular way and your story reads differently.
Hmm.
It does change the way that the depth of that conversation is going to go.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, both parties may not be able to sweep their side of the street.
Hmm.
But recognizing that you're entering this conversation without shame, but for yourself, boundaries, thinking about what do I need? How can I
Hmm.
meet this person? What might I be met with that is not part of my narrative, that's part of their narrative? And how
Hmm.
can I accept that? Or at least acknowledge that, I would say, rather than accept,
Hmm.
and then keep going. That's meeting someone where they're at, that you may not be on the same plane. There's going to be loss in that, but that is one of the best ways to go into it. So many times we think that if I explain something to someone, they'll understand it. But here's the hard truth. You can't explain something to somebody and understand it for them as well. All
Hmm.
you can do is explain it. It's on them whether or not they understand.
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, actually, that makes me think of a very unhealthy relationship dynamic that can sometimes show up that is mostly happening internally in that one person, where we're thinking over and over again, if I just say it the right way, if I just express myself the right way, if I just do the right thing, then maybe they'll love me. Then maybe they'll understand how they're hurting me. If they haven't understood, they don't understand.
Yeah.
And if we keep coming back to that over and over again with the same vulnerability and hope that it's going to be met in a different way by the same person in the same dynamic, that's the kind of thing that might be really helpful to take to therapy and think, what's going on here that's preventing me from being able to kind of get to where I want to be? That's allowing me to kind of enable us to keep having the same pattern over and over again that I keep doing, even though it's a lot of pain. And that kind of figuring that out together alongside your therapist can be really meaningful work that helps you to then understand what do you need and expect in relationships. And as we talked about in the conflict episode, one of the hardest things about that is that we might get some information about compatibility, whether it's about family, friendships, or partners. We might learn something that we ultimately want to take action around, that we ultimately have a boundary around. Um, and might have to have an ending, might have to say goodbye.
Yes.
Sometimes protecting your peace, and this is more a more extreme example, but there are some cases where protecting your peace might look like having someone in your life less or having someone in your life in a different way. There might be times in which our boundary is something around our vulnerability. I don't share vulnerable things with people if they're not going to meet me in them. And so again,
Yeah.
then it's all on us for who do we trust to share vulnerable things with. If someone has shown us time and time again that it's not going to be received in a way that's helpful for us, we then can take that responsibility to say, okay, this is not a relationship for that for me. Maybe they're still a great friend. Maybe we still have a great time hanging out. Maybe not. Up to you.
We often think that another person owes us something. And
Mm,
I think one of the most bitter truths is that they don't.
mm,
But we owe ourselves everything. The older we get, probably the more therapy we have, the more we understand who we are. We change.
mhm,
We understand how we've shown up, where our defenses lie. We start to work on those. That's the shadow side of therapy. It's not pretty, it's so important.
mm.
And we might also understand how difficult it is when we start to see another person's defensive actions that keep them in a place of safety for themselves.
Yeah.
And you can't do anything about that.
Mm,
It I love that aspect of us starting with loss because there's loss in that. There's loss of the hope of that relationship, loss of that veneer of what the relationship might have been.
mhm,
The more you understand yourself and what you need for intimacy, if somebody can't meet you in that and you've tried and they won't, yeah, I think exactly what you're saying, Ryan, that they can't quite be there and they can't make that decision for you. That's on you.
mm,
And that could be, I like to call it a demotion, right? If you had a really intimate relationship with someone, maybe they're demoted to like a friend that gets every part of you for fun,
mm,
but they don't maybe get all the other things. Maybe they become somebody that is an acquaintance that you love to see at parties, but you may not put a lot of time into for one-on-one hangouts.
mm,
And in a really important but extreme example, maybe there's someone you don't want anymore in your life.
mhm,
And that's what you brought up before, Ryan.
mhm.
That when we start to look at this stuff in ourselves, we start to realize, oh, we have a choice to make. And we don't always want to do that because the choice is not always something that looks pretty.
Yeah. And when we talk about that kind of meeting people where they're at, what we're reiterating here in these various ways of saying it is that if we come wanting them to be something they're not, wanting them to be in a place mentally or emotionally where they're not, like understanding or accepting or wanting us back in the same way, whatever the kind of dynamic is with that, if we're doing that, if we're putting our energy into an outcome that's a change-oriented outcome instead of meeting them where they're at, then we're not quite ready to maybe have that conversation. Or that's one of those kind of tainted conversation expectations. That's when we're coming in saying, if I just say it the right way, then they'll change into this other type of person who is like ready to be my cheerleader and understands everything I express emotionally. But that's, you're not meeting them where you're at. You're meeting them where you want them to be.
Yes.
It's not going to work.
Yeah.
And you will beat yourself up trying. I've beat myself up trying this in different cases too. It's like going back into a meat grinder over and over again.
Oh, absolutely. I can actually think in my head immediately as we're having this conversation, how many times have I spent hours thinking I must have not said it correctly?
Mm,
If I could say exactly what's in my head, okay, I got it this way. Oh, that didn't work. Okay, how do I adjust the language? And you realize it was never a you problem.
hmm
Sometimes it's just you could say it the most perfect, eloquent, exact way, and it still might not be met. And there is pain in that because you want somebody to be somewhere where you want them to be.
hmm
Your expectation and your hope get marred by putting somewhere. someone in a place where they're not supposed to be or where they're not meant to be right now for themselves.
Hmm.
And that's
Hmm.
where we don't shame, right? It's where they're meant to be for themselves.
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
when you do this, you protect your peace.
Hmm.
Going back to like the beginning of the episode, when you can do that, when you realize that, when you kind of like recognize like, oh, this is what I'm doing here, that's when you actually start to protect who you are and your peace.
Hmm.
That you allow people to be where they're at, who they are, and what they need for themselves without sacrificing yourself in the process of that.
Yep. Absolutely. And so, in preparing for this episode, we were kind of thinking about if you have a case, a
Yeah.
situation where you don't think it's that likely that someone's going to be able to meet you in the way that you're hoping for, whether it's a parent, partner, friend, whatever the situation is, you're pretty sure that they're not. We thought, like, okay, you got some options over how you
Yeah.
want to approach that in a way that allows you to protect your peace and work from some of these expectations or non-expectations that we're talking about. Option number one, which can be a lot of fun, and can be very difficult, is that you decide to just do it anyways, right? You decide I'm gonna do the vulnerable thing, take the risk for my own sake.
And this is a really cool one.
Mm,
So here's why you would do option one. I'm gonna do it anyway. It's because you need to. There's something you've been sitting on for a long time, and for your own sense of self, healing, growth. If I don't say this, I'm going to always regret I didn't.
hmm.
Look back and see a part of me was lost.
Yeah, this is where that boundary that we have, that expectation we have for ourselves is like, I want to say the thing that's bothering me. And the way to come into that as good as we can is that we know that we're doing it for ourselves, not for their outcome. We want to be able to say, we want to be able to hear ourselves say in the space with them, on the phone with them, whatever, hey, you really hurt me when you did this. Or hey, I was really hoping to have this with you. And we don't know how they're going to respond, but as we were saying, like you're pretty sure in this case that you're not going to be met in that way. So the point of the conversation was for you to get to do the thing, to get to say the thing, to get to practice conflict too, if you want to do that.
Yeah, it's for you. The second one is a bit of a combo where you do it alone.
Mm,
Most of the time, you're going to be doing that with a therapist or a really trusted friend.
yeah.
You're going to do it in a letter. That's a common one. But you can
Hmm.
also do it in a voice note that never gets sent. You're going to do the work and you're going to do it alone. And then you're going to grieve. Oh, you're going to grieve the loss that that conversation was always going to be individual.
Hmm.
And you might do this because you know that doing it is going to rupture something that will never be repaired. This can happen a lot with parental relationships
Hmm.
where I'm gonna say the thing and you'll never hear it, but I needed to say it, even if my own ears are the only ones that hear it. And you will grieve that because you know that you're doing it for yourself, but the other ears will never hear it. And when you do that and you allow yourself to feel that sense of freedom, it's a solo journey,
Hmm.
often with a therapist or someone else, but it's a solo journey because you're not doing it with that person. That's a really legitimate choice. It's legitimate if you know that that relationship actually still has to happen.
Yep.
That you still need to show up for social engagements with friends, or you still need to do this
Mhm.
thing. And doing the thing is going to cause you more harm than good. That's when you would choose option two.
Absolutely. And option two, I've had come up a lot with folks with different cultural or family expectations too, where they're like going no contact with my family isn't something that feels right to me. Doesn't feel right to
Yeah.
my culture. Still want to be an intimate part of my family. I feel like more collectivist kind of culture. But I'm upset about this, so I want to process it on my own. Um, so that can be another example where we decide I'm going to work on my own so I can also preserve a different set of values I have that's important. Another option that we have, a third option that we have is we might take our ideal outcome and think, I know I'm not going to get this idealized outcome that I would really like to have, but is there a good enough outcome that I think I could have if I do this a certain way? That I could have some of my need met, or that my need will be more likely to be met in this scenario. And this might be things about like deciding to communicate it in a particular way, deciding to communicate it in a particular context. So you're really basically trying to approach this conflict in a way that you might be met. It's we very intentional about saying the might because, as we've already said, we have no control over the other person's outcome. But you can approach it in a way that you think is maybe going to be more palatable or more acceptable to them, whether that's about their generation, their culture, how they interact as an individual person. These are all important factors when you're thinking through, like, how can I share this in a way that I think is going to work for them? That's stepping a little bit even further into the meeting them where they're at. I'm going to try to meet
Yeah.
them where they're at in their way.
Yeah. You get to decide which of these three is right for you. And
Hmm.
it can change depending on the person, the circumstance. But those are three that allow you to have a choice. So no matter what happens when you walk into that space, you get the choice.
Hmm.
This is how I want to be met. Because no matter what happens at the end of the day, your healing is still the first and foremost thing that we care about. If you're doing this work and you're navigating and you're understanding your boundaries and the loss inherent in that, you're already doing one of the most fabulous things you possibly could do for lasting change. And
Hmm.
that's recognizing what you need and what you don't need, which sometimes is even one of those risks of therapy we don't always talk about.
Mm, yeah. We learn a lot about ourselves in therapy that we may or may not be ready to learn.
We talked about that in that previous episode of like what might actually happen when we start to realize, oh, shoot, I actually have boundaries now.
Now I have to be responsible for them and notice how they impact my relationships.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
If this resonates with you and you want to work on this, maybe you have a conflict
Mm,
and you want to navigate this with someone, reach out to us. We're here for you. And we'd love to chat about what's going on.
absolutely. Thanks for tuning in. And we also want to remind you all that if you have any questions as a listener, we would love to hear your question. DM us on Instagram, comment on YouTube. However you listen to us, feel free to reach out to us that way. And um, we can answer some listener questions on the air. I love doing that.
We love it. Yeah, please ask us anything. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, check out our others. And stay tuned for even more episodes coming up.
Follow us and leave a review on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And please tell your friends.
You can also follow us on Instagram too at Your Therapist Is Not Okay. Also, if you have any questions that you want us to answer, send us a DM there. We would love to answer your questions. And a lot of our topics come from listeners just like you.